Well, hello. My name is Stephen Kelly. I am a master's student at the School of Information Science and Learning Technology at the University of Missouri. I'm taking a digital humanities course with Dr. Kristen Schuster, and in this brief presentation I'm going to be explaining my semester-long project for the class, and it's the Lord of the Rings book cover project, a descriptive catalog of covers of J.R.R. Tolkien's epic masterpiece. One of my primary missions in this project is to try to add something to the realm of Tolkien scholarship. There are some bibliographies of book covers out there that exist, but really they just offer bibliographic information. What I was interested in was being able to offer some visual analysis, something extra to add to that information. And I think that there's some interesting conclusions that we might be able to draw from really systematic analysis of those covers and what they contain. Whether that tells us something about the texts themselves, whether it tells us about what publishers are trying to do, or really even what are some broad cultural trends that are happening at specific times and locations these books are being published. So that's really one of the purposes in terms of theme, but it's also, of course, a great opportunity for me to try to beef up my digital humanities skills for my future career working in libraries. In terms of scope, I had to quickly realize after getting some initial feedback that I couldn't really cover all of the covers of The Lord of the Rings. There's just hundreds of different covers, and so I really had to limit it down to just proof of concept. And so I ended up choosing about 20 different book covers from different 3-volume and 1-volume editions of The Lord of the Rings. For these choices, it was important to me to maintain a degree of diversity in what I was focusing on, and so there was a variety of both publication year, what the format of the publication, whether it was a 3-volume edition or a 1-volume edition, whether it was a hardcover, paperback, or a mass market paperback. I just thought that it was important to capture a fuller picture, and getting that variety allowed me to do that. Once I ended up choosing what I wanted to analyze, my next step was to start collecting the data. And to do that, I chose to build an Excel sheet. It might seem a little old school in terms of digital humanities scholarship, but I found it to be a very effective way to organize my thoughts and to capture some kind of consistent amount of data from each of the book covers. So over here on the left side of the Excel image, you'll see some bibliographic information, which of course was important to include just to be able to have good metadata structure in my eventual website. But aside from the bibliographic information, what was really important, and where I think my project starts to shine and become its own thing, is in all of the different image tags. And these are over here more in the center of the Excel sheet, and trying to really take a careful inventory of what was actually present in the covers in terms of the artistic subject, the dominant color schemes, the tone, what characters are present, what animals, what vegetation, what objects, what structures, geographic features, and places were present. Because there is actually a tremendous amount of diversity in those covers related to these visual elements. And over here on the far right side of the screen, you'll see another important element, and that was the prose description. I wanted to have something that was going to be easier for people visiting the site to interact with and just read a very clear description of what they're seeing. The Excel sheet has some other different features. So for instance, this image tags by cover field. I don't know why it's not working. There we go. So the image tags by cover gave me an opportunity to really line up cover by cover what the different tags were, and I could start to see the diversity in what I was capturing. Eventually, it ends up giving me a broader inventory of all the tags that I found. So after making all my observations, I compiled them all and found out I found 81 unique image tags, which I separated according to the different categories and which ends up in my eventual site. I found the total image tags and lined them up and alphabetized them so that I could capture some more data about the number of times the tags were showing up, which helped me map the trends and build some graphs that I would then able to use in my final product on the site. And I'll cover some of this a little bit later, but just to give you a sense of where that information is coming from. So, once all the covers were chosen, thoroughly analyzed, and I had all my data in place, it was time to go on and actually build my website. To do that, I ended up using, based on instructor's recommendation, Scalar. I was a little nervous about it because I had never used it before and it looked kind of intimidating, to be honest. But I was willing to try it to learn a new technology rather than going back to an old wiki format or like using just a basic blog software. So even though there was a learning curve with the terminology of the website architecture and all the different tools, I ended up getting the hang of it, at least the basics, and I ended up really appreciating the, I guess, the helpful encoding tools, especially when it came to being able to use the Dublin Core metadata scheme. I had initially wanted to use a different metadata scheme, IIIF, but I ended up not being able to get my mind around it, and so I went back to something that I did have some familiarity with, and so you'll see that represented on the site. So I just want to take you through a little bit of what it was like building the site from the ground up, and then go through some of the more pertinent aspects of the site. So one of the key things I had to do first was just to figure out what the site design was going to be. And so Scalar has this great tool. It allows you to build separate pages, and you'll see over here my table of contents. I've got a home page, a 3-volume edition gallery, a 1-volume edition gallery, sort of an inventory or a legend of those image tags, which you would have seen from my Excel sheet before. A discussion section where I was able to get into some preliminary findings of what the data I was representing, and a future directions / conclusions area, and of course references. So after figuring out what I wanted the general structure of the site to be, I had to start uploading the media, and that by far was one of the more challenging parts learning-wise, was just figuring out how to make it work. And here in the index you can see the various different media that I ended up adding to the site. It includes the covers themselves, it includes some background images, everything else. But one of the benefits is that you're able to look at the media, and from this page, which is used later to build some of the galleries, you can see that I've got my long prose description that lists what I found in a narrative format. There was an option for me to include the different metadata, which I had, again, using the Dublin Core. Allowed me to have all that bibliographic information as a baseline. But for me, the real key thing was the annotations, and so I was able to build the image tags in as annotations that allowed me to use those different keywords that I found and put that into the annotation so that it would become searchable, which I thought would be helpful. That's the sort of background. If we look at the front end, we can see it looks actually a lot better. So this is, like I said, the 3-volume edition gallery, and you can use these arrows to go over various different covers. So these are the original hardcover US editions of the 3-volume version of Lord of the Rings. I love how you can hover over the title information here and see that prose description without having to get into the media file itself. but you can just see as I scroll cover by cover just all the variety that exists. This is really unique for The Lord of the Rings. There's not a lot of books out there that end up getting republished time and time again with different covers, and Lord of the Rings is such a popular and best-selling book that it has allowed for that variety. I want to briefly show you the one-volume editions too, and these are really cool in that they're typically a little less visually complex, but this is a major exception. This is beautiful illustration by Alan Lee. And this one too is one of the more fascinating book covers, but we start to see that there's a tendency for the single volumes to just be a little simpler. So from there, I'd mentioned I'd put my image tag inventory up, and you'll see here all those categories from the Excel sheet that I put here, and this is something that users can use if they want to know exactly what to search for and what will end up producing useful searches. It's my controlled vocabulary, more or less, my rudimentary version of it, I should say. So the discussion section is where I was building in the actual scholarship part of my project, which was a secondary goal. Now, I understand that with just 20 covers out of hundreds of covers, this data, these interpretations aren't exactly 100% accurate. But I think that they can hold up just because of the way I was intentional about the diversity in my cover choices. And so I've got sections for each of these, for instance, showing that illustrated covers take prominence, except, of course, during the early 2000s where the films first came out, Peter Jackson's adaptations of the book. And then the photographic medium takes precedence. Another interesting finding is that landscapes, in terms of, I guess, artistic subject, used to be a lot more prominent. And instead, we're moving more towards portraits and icons, symbols that end up being put on the covers. And sort of a third broad category of conclusions is that overall I'm finding through my analysis that the emotional tone of the covers are getting more negative, getting darker. And I lay out in this section some ideas for interpretations about why I think that might be the case. This word cloud is something that I ended up using as part of one of Scalar's features, and so I thought that was really cool. You can immediately see some of the major image tags that pop up frequently here, reflected down here, these broader categories, showing that horses are very popular, the color black, Frodo, trees, dragons, grass, snakes, birds, forests for some reason. I'd be really interested in seeing how this holds up to, again, a fuller analysis of all the covers, but alas, there's only so much time in the day. Speaking of the end of the day, I do want to close this presentation with some of my thoughts about my progress and some general conclusions under the future directions part of my project, which includes this. Overall, I was very pleased with the end products, especially considering that this was a solo project and considering that I didn't have a lot of experience using Scalar or metadata architecture or anything like that. I think that I ended up creating something that is pretty unique among Tolkien scholarship, and I think it does add knowledge to the field. I was glad that I was able to course correct and make those limitations, even though it's not as comprehensive as I had originally hoped. I think that there's some good bones for future work. And there still is a lot of ways that this project could be improved, especially in terms of increasing the number of covers that make it in the data set. That might even include one day increasing it to covers outside of the US, in the UK, and internationally. Another one of my major limitations were my technology skills, which are continuing to develop, and I think with more time and practice, this site could really start to look really good and do some really interesting things scholarship-wise and digital humanities-wise. With that, I do want to thank you for your time and for listening, and I hope that if you're interested, you check out the project and even get to the point of maybe perhaps joining the fellowship. Thanks.